Well, firstly, let me start by saying thank you to Suresh and his team and everybody that's organised this today and for inviting me here today. As a young person, it's not just about coming here today and speaking about some of my experiences and some of the stuff that we have done as an organisation or some of the things I've learned, but me coming here and listening to some of the conversations I've been had, so I can also learn as an individual. So thank you for that, for everybody that's made today happen. And I was listening earlier to Professor Mark McGovern's speech, and I was thinking, you know what, maybe I should throw mine in the bin and have the professor come up again, because I aim to speak about the Muslim community and the issue of suspected communities. And I'm going to start off with a joke, and forgive me if it's not funny, and forgive me if you've heard it before. There was a man walking in a park, and he saw a young innocent girl being attacked by a dog. The man runs over and fights and wrestles this dog to save this young innocent girl, and in the process he breaks the jaw of the dog. Whilst this is all taking place, a photographer is there, a reporter is there, and he captures everything on his camera, and he heads over to the man and says, "I'm going to make you famous." He said, "I'm going to make you famous. Tomorrow's headlines will lead by brave British man saves young innocent girl." The man says, "Oh, thank you, but there's one problem. I'm not British." He says, "Oh, not a problem. I'll run the headline. Brave Londoner saves young innocent girl from mad dog." The man goes, "One problem again, sir." He says, "What?" He goes, "I'm not a Londoner." So he says, "What are you?" He says, "I'm a Syrian refugee." He says, "Not a problem. Tomorrow's Daily Mail Sun headlines lead with fundamentalist Syrian refugee attacks brave British dog, ISIS links investigated." I think that just sums up for me the idea of suspected communities. And in fact, I was in Scotland Yard, the new Scotland Yard 2 days ago. Don't worry guys, I was surveillancing them at that time, so if any of them are here, I'll let you know who they are. But I was there in a meeting with a good friend of mine who's the PPS to John MacDonald, and Naz Shah, the strong campaigner against the Prevent policy, and she said something very powerful to me. She said, "When you think of Tony Blair, what do you think of?" I'll let the audience reply, please no swearing. When you think of Tony Blair, what do you think of? The Iraq war and everything else. When you think of Margaret Thatcher, you think of poll tax, you think of, I'm not going to go into everything else. But when you think of Muslims today, what do you think of? And this is the pinnacle of suspected communities. Because for some people, and a lot of people, the link to extremism, the link to terrorism, to the word Muslims, and we could go on and mention other minority communities, and the link to criminality and the link to other issues and how they're suspected of these kind of things actually take place. And this is what is suspected communities, this first outlook of a word, of a whole community, and a generalization of them all. And I feel that if you're a British Muslim and you go to the airport, you know how it feels to be a suspected community. You know you're not going to that separate line because it's an odd chance of a random selection. And I speak to young British Muslims, and I speak to young British Muslim girls, and they tell me that they will wear the hijab, even though they want to wear the hijab, but they wear it after they get a career, because they feel as though the prejudice will take place. I myself, I have Vakas, in his pupillage applications for years used to say, don't worry, this year I'm dumbing down the Muslim rhetoric and the work I do with the Muslim community. And I know dozens of young British Muslims, when they fill in the Equal Opportunities Form, that they don't say they're Muslims because they feel, they will be discriminated against. And when we look at statistics, and we've seen research showing that 76%, in some cases, Muslims are 76% more discriminated in getting a job than their white counterparts, even when you have equal qualifications. And it reminds me of a quote from Martin Luther King where he says, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few." And it makes me think of the ideas of the Americas and the ideas of the indigenous people living in parts of Bolivia, that not only were they deprived economically, not only as minorities were they, affected by the cuts to services and welfare, but they were also affected as a minority group, suspected as criminals, and the issues with that. And then we turn to a recent study that was done by Peter Auburn, I think in 2008, which looked at headlines affecting the Muslim community. And when we saw that these headlines were changed to other communities that are also persecuted in terms of media representation, you found that people saw them as normal when it came to the Muslim community, and were shocked when these headlines were changed. And we've seen this recently with Moeen Ali, the English cricketer. He says, when I travel with the England cricket team in my cricket uniform, I'm okay, I don't get stopped. But coincidentally, with my beard, when I'm by myself, I get stopped. You find that a lot. Or the Manchester student recently, you found a Manchester student who pinned down a criminal, and he called the police, actually, and he became a saviour. But, in the headline, it was Manchester student, no mention of Muslim. In fact, if he was a criminal, we would know what the headline there would have been. So we can see the issues in the media, the issues that are growing, the recent ICM poll, the recent Sun poll of 1 in 5 Muslims, and the polarization is actually affecting not just the perception within the communities, but the perception is actually passing out to people across communities to view the Muslim community as a suspect community. And then also the rise in Islamophobia that actually comes with that, and we've seen the effects of women wearing hijab in London being the most affected because they're seen as the most Muslim, or men with beards, so the issue of religiosity being linked to the idea of Islamophobia. And also I turned to a recent report that was done in 2011 on suspect communities and counter-extremism that actually brought in comparisons with the Irish community and the Muslim community. And they found many comparisons, similarities between what the Irish community faced and what the Muslim community are facing today, as well as differences. And some of the similarities they found were, the similarities in the substance that, was being reported in the media, the type of, us versus them narrative that is sent out. There's also the criteria that there's moderate Muslims and there's radical Muslims, or there's moderate Irish people and there's radical Irish people, and that could be resonated to other communities as well. And this actually stems from an academic debate for me, that goes back to the 1990s, and some could argue with Toynbee actually goes, further, into history, but especially with people like Bernard Lewis and Samuel Huntington, and these are, this idea of the clash of civilizations, that the idea that the Muslim community is part of this one civilization, and they have to, that their allegiances lie in some desperate land in Saudi Arabia or whatever they want to put it, or in a caliphate in Iraq at the moment. Actually, that's the latest one. But it might move somewhere else. But we don't know what's happening there. But just generally, this continuation of us versus them narrative that is pushed, that either you're with us or you're against us. This idea of British values, if you're against us, or you're with our way of life, or you're with their way of life. And this constant argument of British Muslims having to say they're proud British Muslims. In fact, the ICM poll, one thing it did show is that British Muslims are actually proud to be British, more proud than actually, in fact, the average representation of people are suggested. And then we come to the problematic issue of the prevent strategy. Now, I'll make it clear, I don't have problems with all aspects of the prevent strategy. I do think we need certain aspects of the prevent strategy, or we need a prevent strategy to deal with issues. But I have problem with the policies, I have problems with the marketing, I have problems with the way in which this certain prevent strategy is actually implemented and directed. It is deliberately directed and orchestrated towards discriminating against the Muslim community in its onset. And I actually support the work of the NUT and the NUS and the other organisations that Mark mentioned earlier for standing against this, because it links religiosity to extremism. The idea that, for example, if you become more religious, you might become more extreme. Well, I've just been to Indonesia recently, and we traveled in Indonesia, a very, very religious society built on piety, very proud Indonesians, built around over 90 languages and 100 cultures and so many thousand islands, and the biggest Muslim majority country, a secular country, but biggest Muslim population in the world. And religiosity doesn't link to a radical thinking. This idea that, for example, religiosity does. And the problems with that actually are seen in what we find in the case studies when we look at Prevent. When we look at, for example, Walston Forest, council sending out certain leaflets, certain questionnaires into schools, asking young Muslim students up to the age of 9 actually about their religious views, so they can pin them in a box of how radical they are. Or when you've got Camden Council safeguarding, team telling parents that their views on foreign policy, their views on certain government policies in opposition to them could be a factor, could be an indicator for extremism. When you have people going and supporting a boycott on certain Israeli goods, for whatever good or bad that might be, but being put into a Prevent channel scheme for that, or people attending pro-Palestinian demonstrations and then being referred to the channel scheme. Or we've got young children from the ages of 2 in East London suffering from learning disabilities. And I said Alhamdulillah and praise to God when Liverpool beat Dortmund the other day, and I said that was a mercy from God. And I didn't get put in the Prevent strategy. And even more, he actually becomes historic when you look at these case studies. We had a young kid actually who was trying to refer to terrorist houses, and he said terrorist houses. And I actually remember this because until recently I didn't know I suffered from dyslexia. But I was a kid who wrote terrorist houses. But Prevent policy wasn't about then, so I survived. And this isn't a lie, this is actually something that took place. And even when you go into the details of the Prevent policies and the indicators, the vagueness of the Prevent policy on how people are seen as radical or extreme, the idea if you're influenced or you're controlled by groups, you're somehow an extremist. Well, why isn't the Prime Minister arrested? Because he's influenced and controlled by bankers. But we don't see him put into the Prevent policy. We don't see him linked to the channel program, but we see offshore accounts and everything else. But that's another debate for another day. And I could just go on about the surveillance in Birmingham. And the thing is, it's just a difficult topic with people like Gareth Pace and Imran Khan and everybody else here, and the experts on the topic to say about, and the surveillance of communities that is actually taking place. But I don't usually do this, but I'm actually going to quote Gareth as she sat next to me. To cut her speech out if I can actually. But Gareth said something very important, and she said, We've lost our way in this country. We have entered a new dark age of injustice, and it is frightening that we are overwhelmed by it. I know I'm representing innocent people who know a jury they face will inevitably be predisposed to find them guilty. This idea that you are guilty before proven, you're guilty before anything actually, because of what I said earlier, because there's not 5 black men in a court, there's a 1 black man. And something that we talked about later on, I don't want to go into details, is the Rather Than 12 campaign. And this is something that I've had direct links to, and we actually boycotted South Yorkshire Police on this actually, and what came about from that. And it's a long stretch of debate, and I'm sure they'll go into that. But this idea that a whole community can be brandished as guilty because of the crimes of another, which wouldn't happen to the white indigenous community, or wouldn't happen to some other communities, is actually unlawful and is unjust, and we must step up and fight for it. And this is why I thank everybody for having events like this. I thank, as a young person, being able to be young and present here. And I also want to say, John isn't here today, that we congratulate people like John, who have been comrades before they got got to places of power, and are comrades today and supporting causes, and are out there protesting, and are in here today with us today. So just because they're not here, I think even then we must say we support them and be with them for the work they do and the support they do, because they do make a difference, and they make a difference for those people who are in difficult situations as minorities, in poverty, in difficult situations. So I end by actually saying thank you to people like John, people like Gareth, and people like yourselves. Thank you very much.